to be meeting here virtually with NTDA Chief Executive Stefan Hay and BTMA Chief Executive Graham Wilson to discuss the latest developments in tyre safety and regulation. So take it away, Graham. Let's see what the latest developments have been.
Well, thank you, Chris. I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes, at least that's the plan, about the origins of tyre performance regulation and the tyre labelling regulation. I'm going to throw in a bit of speculation about future measures as well to try and make it a little bit more interesting. So we're going to stay on a pretty high level throughout this presentation, so there should be no need to tune out. First, we're going to take a quick look at the political drivers at the origin of performance regulations, and then we're going to jump straight to their impact over the last 20 years. We'll skip all the gory details. Then we'll take a look at the rollout of the present regulation and see that there's an important milestone coming up next May. Next, we're going to look at some of the key points of the new labelling regulation and how, as an industry, we plan to make rollout as painless as possible. And then finally, we'll close the loop back to where we started by looking at the current political drivers and likely future trends. So here goes. Back in the 90s, there was growing awareness of the effect of traffic noise on health, particularly in urban areas. This led to the first limitation of tyre rolling noise that was deployed progressively from 2003 to 2011. Over time, more evidence about the health impact of noise came out, and there was growing awareness of climate change, and together these formed the basis of the new regulation that we're more familiar with. All the while, the tyre regulations were tempering the regulators' ardour with the realities of production development cycles and supply chain inertia. Finally, the regulation was framed to roll out between 2011 and 2023, more of which in a moment. So much for the origins. If we skip straight through to the impact, what can we see if we look back over the last 20 years? Well, first of all, the maximum permitted rolling noise from tyres has dropped by 75%. 4 tyres today are not allowed to make more noise than 1 tyre 20 years ago. That's a spectacular reduction, hidden to a large extent by the logarithmic decibel scale used to express noise levels. Over the same period, maximum rolling resistance has come down by a quarter. That's the CO2 equivalent of removing 2 million cars from the UK's roads. These are not small changes. At the same time, we've maintained minimum wet grip performance against the side effects of reducing rolling resistance. Wet grip and rolling resistance are naturally opposed in tyre design. The measures to reduce rolling resistance are almost always detrimental to wet grip. So maintaining wet grip whilst reducing rolling resistance by 25% has been itself quite a major achievement. So let's for a moment dip into the nitty-gritty of the rollout of the current regulation. That's a story that's mostly behind us now, but as manufacturers, as manufacturers, the story is behind us. But for the supply chain, there's still an amount of working through. The story is summarized in 3 volumes about car, van, and truck tyres, with chapters for each of the different parameters and episodes for each stage of the product's life. At each major milestone, there's been a 30-month grace period to clear non-compliant stock from the supply chain. One of the remaining grace periods runs out next year. From the 1st of May next year, it will no longer be legal to sell car tyres without the WS2R2 sidewall marking, or van tyres without the S2R2 marking. Worthy of note is the Department of Transport has recently adopted enforcement measures to support improved compliance with the regulation. We'll see how that translates in practice. Now we're going to switch horses and talk about tyre labelling. You'll soon see that the 2 topics are interconnected. The EU has adopted a new tyre labelling regulation to be implemented on the 1st of May next year. The regulation had a difficult gestation and what might be described as a forceps delivery. I won't go into the details, but there are still some glitches to iron out. However, let's stick to the headlines. The new label has only 5 classes compared to the present 7. We've managed to conserve the same bandwidth, so the old and new classes can be mapped across. For car and van tyres, A, B and C are unchanged. E becomes D, the that isn't used in the present scheme, and the old F becomes E. G is no longer needed due to the effect of the tyre performance regulation. The outcome of the new two measures combined is that most tyres will be in the new A to D range. The new label also mandates the display of a three-peak mountain snowflake snow grip pictogram, as it's now called, which is new since the original labelling regulation. Finally, underlying the label is a revised testing procedure that will progressively improve the consistency of test results. So much for the overview. Now what about rollout, which is the piece that we're all worried about? Unfortunately, this is where we encounter some Brexit-related uncertainty. According to the Northern Ireland Protocol, we expect the new regulation will roll out in the province as per in the EU from the 1st of May next year. Of this much, we are reasonably confident. However, what happens in Great Britain remains uncertain. We understand from the Department of Transport that the Minister is, as they say, minded to adopt the new regulation in Great Britain. This much is reassuring. However, there remains some uncertainty as to whether this will be on the 1st of May or at a later date. We've not been slow to emphasise the challenges, to not say chaos, arising from a delayed GB implementation in relation to Northern Ireland and the rest of the EU. Dialogue with the DfT is ongoing, and we hope for a rapid resolution as time is now running short. All that said, how do we think rollout might work? Clearly, no one wants to be relabeling several million tyres presently in the supply chain. We've proposed to the DfT the following digital rollout that builds on existing data and IT infrastructure at retailers. In essence, an upgrade of the point of sale software would be sufficient to enable retailers to present the new label from day one, regardless of whether the tyre had the old or the new label on it. So let's take this line by line. First of all, tyres supplied with new labels. From the 1st of May next year, tyres with the new label will progressively appear on the market. But we should note that the manufacturers and importers will still be allowed to deliver tyres from stock with the old label after the 1st of May. For the tyres with new labels, the new label data and the image of the new label will be available from the product database. I hadn't mentioned that, had I? The new labelling regulation introduces a European product database. This will contain a publicly accessible part containing details of the manufacturer or importer, plus all the labelling information, and an image of the specific label. A second part with restricted access will contain test results and other compliance information necessary for enforcement authorities. End of parentheses. Now back to the story. Retailers will be able to use the image from the product database at the point of sale, in advertisements, in brochures, on their websites, and so on, in compliance with the requirements of the new regulation. All is well in the brave new world. But what about existing stocks and tyres supplied with the old label after the 1st of May, I hear you ask? Well, with a suitable point of sale software upgrade, existing tyre label information held by the retailer, in order to put it on the customer invoice, could be upgraded in line with the new classes. As we've seen, it's a simple mapping operation. The point of sale software could display a facsimile of the new label, just as it can presently show the current label, and include the upgraded labelling information. The retailer could use this image in order to fulfill the obligations regarding consumer communications, etc. All would be well. Finally, and not least, there'd be no need to relabel the tyres, as in general, it's not seen by the customer before it's fitted. This is the proposal that we're presently defending with the Department for Transport. We hope to know more in a week or two. Finally, then, to round off, what future trends can we discern? Can we predict what the next 20 years hold? I think our horoscope contains some old and some new ideas, both of course presented with 20th century gloss. Decarbonisation is part of the response to climate change. We estimate that over 2 million tonnes of tyre per year of CO2 are wasted due to the fitment of replacement tyres with non-OE spec rolling resistance. By 2050, the entire light vehicle fleet may well be electric, and this issue may be less important. But in the meantime, this is a serious opportunity for saving. Electrification appears, however, to be presently out of reach for heavy commercial vehicles, so demand for still lower rolling resistance seems to be a sure bet. Microplastics is the new boy on the block since the turn of the millennium. Scientists are still working on the nature, dispersion, and fate of tyre road wear particles, but it's clear there's pressure to reduce emissions. The industry is working on a reliable and reproducible test method for abrasion resistance, but this is still some way off. However, provision's already been made in the new labelling regulation to include information about abrasion resistance and mileage. It's now just a question of time. Finally, what future measures can we foresee within the next 5 years or so? I think a minimum level of abrasion resistance through international regulation is a sure bet. I also believe that fiscal incentives for low wearing and low rolling resistance tyres are more than likely. After all, government will need the money after COVID, and what better pretext than protecting the environment? Well, I hope you found that interesting and informative. I've talked more than long enough, so I'm going to hand back to Chris, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Graham. That was a very succinct and informative summary of what is a fairly complex set of legislation. But if I may briefly summarise, I think what we saw there was that the tyre industry has made significant gains in terms of rolling noise reductions and rolling resistance improvements. And in parallel with that, we have threefold chord of new and current legislation. One, setting a general standard for performance of tyres, the current labelling legislation, and then the transition to the future labelling legislation. All of that, of course, needs for the rubber to hit the road, and that takes place in the distribution chain and ultimately at the retail point of sale. So now we have a context to add into that with the announcement over the weekend of a second lockdown, and of course the background of Brexit. Stefan, I wondered if you could help bring some retail perspective to what this might mean in terms of application for tyre dealers.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, tyre retailers, I think at the moment are feeling that there is a lot to be done in a very short period of time, and against a backdrop of a lot of uncertainty, as Graham has indicated. It's all very well sort of working towards that 1st of May date, but are we or aren't we, I suppose, remains the big question. But nevertheless, the majority of our members that I've spoken to are embracing the fact that tyre labelling is changing. I think they fully anticipate that we will fully adopt. I don't know what Graham's view on this is, but I think it's pretty much a done deal for the majority of our retailers, because they remember the first tyre label introduction and how that sort of came to pass. I think there are a couple of issues here. I mean, first and foremost, going back to when tyre labelling was introduced, our members embraced it very positively. Of course, we want to do anything we can and support anything we can to get better performing tyres on the road. It's as simple as that. So it was met with a lot of enthusiasm. People put together marketing campaigns, updated their websites, were advising customers accordingly. And of course, the biggest downfall for most people was that apathy set in once there was no enforcement. Graham and I attended many, many meetings with the National Measurement Office as the original regulator, hoping that one day they would get the regulatory powers required to actually go out and do something about enforcement. And it never came to pass for multiple political reasons over the years, elections and referenda more often than not, but it didn't happen. So apathy did set in, and retailers will tell you very openly that in the distribution chain, their relationship with customers boils down to what tyres have you got available, what's the best for this vehicle, what's the cheapest you can do. So getting into the finer detail of tyre labelling became a thing of the past. Now, when we started to sit down with the new market surveillance team, the DVSA, and the new team that's been put together there to look at tyre labelling, it was quite interesting talking to them about the surveillance visits that had been undertaken with tyre distributors all over the country, because there was a common theme, irrespective of the size of the distributor, irrespective of where they were situated in the UK, they were all saying the same thing. Once the surveillance unit identified themselves, sort of moving from the mystery shopper to the I am an enforcement officer, what the distributors were saying is, why are you concentrating on this? Why are we introducing new labeling at a time when we're supposed to be coming out of Europe? You know, why is this such a big issue when at the end of the day, I can go 600 yards down the road and buy completely uncontrolled part-worn tyres from an old yard? And it always boiled back to that same thing. People felt there were other priorities that needed to be addressed. The issue of Brexit that Graham mentioned, you know, that is such a big question mark, especially for our distributors based in Northern Ireland. I think, you know, to say that they were confused would actually be sort of playing it down. I don't think they're just confused. I think they're very, very concerned about how all of this is going to work. So I think, you know, tyre labelling, although it is still positively embraced, is at the bottom of the list for the distributors. Getting through Brexit, understanding the implications of Brexit, and to be quite frank, getting through yet another lockdown in England and multiple versions of restrictions in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. That's what's key on the agenda at the moment. And I think this has become a bit of a distraction. I think many of our distributors are quite frustrated by it and see it as a non-priority.
So if we can take a little diversion at that point, what are the main routes for getting through this lockdown, and how do you perceive lockdown 2.0 in comparison with the first one?
In terms of the first one, you'll remember, Chris, you and I liaised frequently at the beginning of the first lockdown, and we lobbied government quite extensively to get clarification about the role of tyre distributors in all of this. And it was quite clear at a very early stage in our conversations with various government departments that tyre distributors are seen as essential services. And clearly, if we start with the commercial side of the tyre industry, there are more trucks and vans on the road than ever. You know, distribution has gone through the roof. So distribution was seen as essential. Anything that supported distribution was seen as essential. And of course, you know, our guys and girls were keeping trucks on the road. And many of our members were probably not as busy as usual, but certainly very close to as busy as usual, as we saw an increase of freight on the roads. If we compare that to now, supermarkets will remain open. You know, all supermarkets and food retail and essential retail outlets will remain open. So that means, again, trucks on the road. People will want deliveries. That means, you know, more smaller vehicles on the roads. Online shopping will go through the roof again. You know, we have no doubt about that. The construction industry is on the road still. So, you know, we anticipate that the commercial side will be very busy. On the more sort of high street retail, fast fit centre side of things, again, garages were told stay open. So we recommended to members that they should remain open, and the vast majority did. But then, of course, the MOT and that decimated footfall. So as I've said many times before, I think that decision on MOTs was made for the right reasons, but it probably ultimately was the wrong decision in terms of the knock-on effect it's had on the industry. So I don't anticipate we're going to see that again. The majority of our retailers are telling me that they are going to remain open. They're as busy as they ever were. They're already complaining about staff shortages, skills shortages. People did lose staff during lockdown because, going back to that delivery argument, people were being offered lots more money to go and work for the likes of Amazon, which was very unfortunate, you know, because we lost skills people. And as Graham is acutely aware from discussions we've had at the Tyre Industry Federation, you know, we already have a huge skills shortage. And certainly, you know, we have an issue with bringing younger people, new people into the industry as well. So I think it's going to be busy. I think it will remain busy for our members. I don't anticipate that many of them will be shutting down, not for a period of a month. I think it would be too much to actually lock down with a view to reopening in a month's time. But it's you know, against the backdrop of a massive investment, both financial and training investment, that our distributors have made into making sure that the depots are safe, COVID safe, that the reception areas for members of the public are COVID safe, and it has been a massive investment. There can be no doubt about that. I'm talking to the aftermarket that supplies the gloves and the hand sanitizers and the masks and everything else that our members need. I can tell you now that they are absolutely flat out supplying just the automotive trade those materials.
So, Stefan, in the context of all of those challenges for the distribution chain, is there a danger that the more general tyre safety message that we're talking about now gets a bit lost in all of that? And what can be done to stop that from happening?
Well, I think it's I mean, that's a really good question, because it's not about the tyre safety message being lost, because I can sort of hand on heart say that from an NTDA member's perspective, the issue of tyre safety, the issue of dangerous part-worn tyres are top of the agenda. And of course, we've just come out of the Tyre Safe month, where once again, the Tyre Safe has been putting the safety message out there. But what does concern me is the impact of the first lockdown, which we're still reeling from, and the current lockdown and the restrictions around the country on the economy. We all know tens of thousands of people have lost their jobs, businesses are closed, further businesses could fail as a result of what's going on. And that means that people's budgets will get tighter and tighter. And as we saw in the last recession, people will look for alternatives to buying safe premium product. Will it get me down the road? I'll buy a part-worn tyre. That really concerns me. And I know this is something that certainly concerns members, because they're already being asked for, have you got a cheaper tyre? Have you got a cheaper tyre? What deals have you got going? And we're, I think, on the cusp of people starting to think, actually, I'll probably get away with a couple of part-worn tyres. And that is a big, big concern. So I'd be saying to members now, really do work with your customers, really communicate with them, treat every single one of them as valued and as an individual, and make sure that you're talking to them about the safest but most cost-effective product for them.
Graham or Stefan, I don't know which one of you wants to jump in on this, but something we learned from the first session, which was a kind of market data-based session, was that the results of the first lockdown on the industry were probably not quite as negative as some people predicted. So in the first half of the year, some people were suggesting the market would be down across Europe about 25%. The data seems to suggest it is actually more like 14%. And there are differences in segments and particular markets. Some not looking so bad and some looking worse. But two key trends did stand out. One was that, in fact, three key trends. One was that the move to online and mobile has been significant. The take-up of all season has been much less affected than the other segments in the car tyre market, and also there has been a desegmentisation effect. So the share of the market occupied by budget has gone up by about 2 percentage points at the cost of mid-range products. So I wonder, how does all of that play into what we're talking about now with labelling, with standards, with premium budget, mid-range, and even part-worn tyres being on the agenda of the consumer? And I just wonder if we could get two different points of view on that.
Would you like to start, Graham?
Well, I'm not quite sure which handle to get hold of there, Chris. I think Stefan summarised it very well. It's clear that if we look at the consumer side, there's going to be, we haven't seen by any means the full impact, and there will be pressure on budgets. And I think, if you want to look at a sector that's probably is going to grow, it's going to be the part-worn sector. In terms of tyre sales, I think we have to be absolutely lucid about that. And so we're trying to work in our different ways with government to improve compliance in that market. Otherwise, what can we say that's going to be, add extra light to the words of the experts? I'm not sure I'm in a good place for that, Chris.
Shall I add something about online?
Stefan, yes.
Well, let's start with mobile. I mean, it's quite clear that we saw an increase on the retail side, so more the sort of consumer rather than commercial end of the market. We saw a significant increase in mobile performance, and some of our distributors initially closed their depots and went mobile, and some of them have actually expanded their businesses through that. So they've expanded their fleets of vans. And that's been very, very successful for them. So I would say that ability to be flexible, the ability to be agile with your business model is going to be crucial in the future for our distributors. You know, they've got to, and we will help them, of course, as the trade association, and we're talking about these trends at our meetings, executive council meetings, etc. But you know, I think that the distributors need to be aware that you've got to go with the condition flow, if that makes sense. Now, this is where online becomes absolutely crucial as well. There are still a lot of businesses, not just in our trade, but across the board, who still have really user-unfriendly websites, clunky websites that are difficult to navigate around, that are difficult to get information from, they're difficult to get prices from, you know, that sort of thing. And I think, you know, this is where perhaps even some of our supplier members who are experts in online retail and online commerce and online, you know, get your website right and get it up there and listed properly. All of these things are going to go hand in hand. So I would agree with the trends that you've quoted. I would agree with the views that our members are voicing, that, you know, having a good online presence, a user-friendly online presence, combined with that agility and adaptability to get out there and go to the customer if needed, will be essential. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen come the 2nd of December. I don't know if we'll come out of lockdown or it'll be extended. You know, I think we're a bit wobbly on that one. Even the government is wobbly on that one. Surprise, surprise. But if I was a betting man, I think there will be restrictions in some part of the UK leading through into sort of the end of first quarter next year. And I think that sort of, you know, keeping the communication open to your customers is going to be absolutely essential, and responding to their needs, and not just sitting there thinking this is our business model, this is how we've done it since, you know, 1927. It's not going to work.
Is it in fact mutually beneficial to have the updated legislation in a time when we're having to move towards online? It just strikes me that when consumers are looking online, it's the best opportunity to actually see how a tyre performs. Far better than telephone, far better even than face-to-face, unless you've got a screen where you can show comparison to the consumer. But I just wonder, are there ways that can actually help each other?
Oh, absolutely, and I think, you know, we've got some real sort of ambassadors out there in the world of social media. You'll be familiar with many of them. And you know, they're out there, they're talking about tyre safety. So going back to Andrew's question about keeping the message live on tyre safety, every single day, you know, I'm seeing NTDA members talking about tyre safety online. We see them talking about tyre performance. We see them talking about budget versus premium. We see them talking about consumer patterns and marketing and promoting their businesses and the tyre trade as a professional trade that it is. So I think that, you know, there is no doubt about it. As it stands right now, online is absolutely where it's all happening. We're seeing more and more high street stores closing. We're seeing more and more retailers going online only. And I think that all of these things are complementary. So, you know, making yourself visible, promoting the right messages to the consumer, making sure that people can easily buy from you and do business with you, absolutely complementary to that overall success. And let's face it, as we've seen from office environments in London and other major cities, you know, more and more people are looking to work from home. So, you know, going to their home is going to be, I think, a big opportunity. And equally, I think a lot of people will start looking at the overheads of their business premises. You know, do we need to have huge depots sat out there, or do we need to go mobile? Now, clearly, I don't want any of our members to start closing their depots, but I think they will probably look at using them in a smarter, more intelligent way as things go forward.
Yeah, perhaps I can add into that, Chris, a perspective in terms of to sort of come back to the labelling question and this whole challenging area of how do you communicate with the customer on a topic that, let's be quite honest, most of them aren't interested in. And I think the opportunity of the online channel is that you can present so much more of this information in a graphical way. Whereas you're standing in the yard, looking at the car, looking at the tyres, a whole load of parameters, and they're all very intangible. I'm not familiar with your average shopper. If you can put it on a screen with some graphics, you can communicate much more effectively, I think, with the consumer. And we've seen this. I mean, where you sit, you see it too. But as I understand it, we're seeing an increase in people researching tyre purchase online, whether they buy online or they then go to the bricks and mortar place to actually make the purchase. But there's more researching going on online, which in a way is facilitated, and there's a cultural change, which is what Stefan's talking about. People more and more are looking to their computer, their laptop, their tablet, their phone as the means to access the shopping, whether it's shopping for clothes or groceries or whatever. And so it's good that we're there, that we're increasingly there as a tyre industry. It is an opportunity to communicate what are otherwise rather dull and dreary messages. And you can get that over in some graphics. And what we see, as I understand it, is that people who've researched online, this may be chicken and egg, they're the ones who are interested in tyres in the first place. They tend to the outcome is they tend to buy products that are mid to premium range rather than the cheap and cheerful. But somewhere there is this process of better communication that's facilitated by the medium of visual impact.
Mm. I would agree with that, and something else I'd like to add to Greg's comment there. We've also seen an increase in false claims of membership on websites and on social media. So this is another thing that we're having to tackle. Now, going back to the visual impact point that Graham made, when people go into a website and what sort of accreditations does this company have, and people are claiming to be members of the NTDA and carrying our logo, we're having to deal with that. We're getting reports in from members and consumers who, they're contacting us to make a complaint against a member, only for us to have to tell them actually that company's not a member. They're breaking the law and we'll deal with it. So we're seeing more of that as well. And equally, being more responsive and getting more people on the road during lockdown situations or restriction situations, you'll be aware we've had to respond and introduce the card. And these are proving really popular because people want to be recognised when they're out there and be able to say to the consumer, look, I'm a key worker, I work for an NTDA member company. And so all of these sorts of things, that visual impact of accreditations and products and quality products, and all of these things need to be addressed. But going back to the online point, online is where it's at. Social media will support that, and the more people can promote and market their professionalism, the quality of the products that they're selling, their accreditations to the various bodies, the better.
One kind of follow-up question to all of this: how do these changes in legislation and the ongoing efforts in regard to part-worn tyres fit in with the developments with tyre ageing or the Tyre campaign?
I'm not sure there's a direct connection there, Chris, to be quite honest. The tyre ageing story has run for quite some time. Just last Thursday, the statutory instrument, the legal text was published, introducing the amendment to the construction and use regulations to bring into law the restriction on tyre age on the front axles of trucks and buses and minibuses from the 1st of February. Yeah, that's a story that's run. It's an issue that we are concerned to, shall we say, communicate across the industry and improve tyre, to use an old-fashioned word, tyre husbandry, tyre management. We're just in the throes of finalising an update of the guide that we put out 5 years ago now, because time flies, for tyre management on heavy commercial vehicles. Incorporating the kind of feedback and experience that's been gained over the last 5 years. And of course, that will include the latest words about the tyre ageing ban and so on. But really, it's that one is all about tyre care in life and, shall we say, responsible tyre management, knowing what tyres you've got fitted to your vehicle, and managing them actively rather than a fit and forget approach, which, let's say, many a consumer gets away with from one MOT test to another. But on a commercial vehicle, it's just not good enough. I came across as a kind of fallout, incidentally, of the tyre age legislation process was what I thought was a fascinating statistic from the Department for Transport. I'd always assumed in my naivety that the great majority of commercial vehicles were subject to O licensing. Well, there's 30% of trucks on the road that aren't covered by the O licensing requirement. Because O licensing only applies, I discovered, if you're transporting other people's goods. So if you're a scaffolding company hauling your own scaffolding from one site to another, you've got serious bits of road hardware completely unregulated outside of the operator licensing scheme, which is good and rigorous, and those who are operating under it are under the cosh of the traffic commissioners, who are not slow in deploying their enforcement powers. But 30%, would you believe, of heavy commercial vehicles aren't under that regime. I was staggered. Equally, 25% of buses and coaches somehow or other managed to legally avoid being under that regime. Well, if that's the country's regime for assuring roadworthiness of heavy commercial vehicles, then perhaps that's a place that should we say, society, not just tyre trade associations, need to be saying the coverage isn't adequate.
As you know, I mean, we would have had Francis speaking at the Tyre Industry Conference had it gone ahead live. And right from the beginning, Francis and I have enjoyed a good relationship, and the NTDA supported the Tyre campaign against a couple of backdrops, really. First and foremost, we believe, and as we can see from the way that tyre labelling is changing, and the manufacturers are putting more and more effort into the performance of tyres and the safety of tyres and how they're constructed, that tyres, by and large, are safe, extremely well engineered pieces of kit. They're absolutely wonderful. And I never thought I'd be sat here saying tyres are wonderful, but as Graham knows, it gets to you in the end. But they are, and that has been the backdrop. We work with fantastic manufacturers who are innovative, who are intelligent, who are committed, who are respectful towards their customers, and they're creating great product. But the fact remains, eventually things wear out. Everything wears out. I know I get worn out. So that's what it boils down to. And we thought it was a good time to sort of draw a line in the sand and say, okay, when should we be looking at this? And we thought that 10 years was a good, sensible cutoff point. And I'll tell you why. When we spoke to our commercial tyre distributors, who are, as Graham quite rightly points out, they're professionals. They're involved in tyre husbandry. They're working with their customer base. They're working with fleets. They all said, well, we can't remember the last time we came across a 10-year-old tyre on a truck or a bus or a coach. The 6 is pretty much the oldest we've come across, but normally we're changing them before then because they do get worn out, or because it's part of the policy that we've got, or because we're following the guidelines produced by TIF. All of those things are in place. So it was the rogue element that we were addressing. That rogue element that ignored the rules or didn't follow regulations or just simply disappeared under the radar. So that's why we felt it was absolutely safe to support Francis in what she was trying to achieve. And let's face it, it was an extremely well-structured campaign. It gathered huge momentum, a lot of supporters, and well done her. Congratulations on what's been achieved so far. But it didn't have an impact on the professional end of the market, because manufacturers are still producing outstanding product, and tyre distributors are involved in correct tyre husbandry, making sure this sort of thing doesn't happen. So it's that fringe element that needs to be addressed, and we feel the implementation of this will address that, but not exclusively, as Graham points out, because there will always be a loophole somewhere that somebody will try and use.
in light of Brexit and lockdown, what further inroads do you think can actually be made in things like tightening up on the O licensing you were talking about, Graham, and other pieces of legislation that have been handled in relation to the tyre industry at the moment?
I think one of our we have to be humble and realistic. A little like Stefan was saying earlier, tyres, mercifully, we might say, are not high in the government's priorities. Just right now, they've got some awfully big dossiers that we would all, I think, honestly prefer they dealt with those in priority, even if we have got our pet hobby horses that we're trying to pursue. The reality is there's a colossal challenge of Brexit. And I think we have to say that the conjunction of coronavirus and lockdowns and all the consequences and all the challenges that it presents, combined with the known and largely still unknown challenges of rolling out Brexit on the 1st of January, it's a perfect storm. I was talking with Alfred Graham of the Imported Tyre Manufacturers Association a few days ago, and he was saying already, as a result of COVID, nothing to do with foreseeable challenges of Brexit, that ships bringing tyres across from Asia are standing off Felixstowe for a fortnight awaiting unloading because of the reduced capacity at Felixstowe, because of the obligation to clean the cabin of every straddle carrier, crane and everything else at the beginning of every shift, end of every shift, and so on and so forth. Just the nitty-gritty of running a COVID-compliant operation has reduced the capacity such that there's 2 weeks worth of ships standing off Felixstowe. So much so that apparently some of the shipping lines are going to cut the losses. They're going to stop sailing to Felixstowe. They'll bring you tyres from China to somewhere in mainland Europe where the ports are bigger and haven't got the same capacity constraints or whatever's going on. And then, well, you'll have to manage from there, which means that we'll simply be exacerbating the foreseeable and widely publicised challenges of the Channel ports come Brexit Day. All the extra volume of product that was going to be landed somewhere in the UK that will now land somewhere Northern Europe and will come by road and across the Channel. So there really is a perfect storm brewing. And in that context, we're chipping away in our little dark corner about smooth rollout of tyre labelling regulation, because from our perspective, there's an elegant solution and it could be painful if we don't. Well, you know what, guys, we just need to be a bit humble here and look at the big picture, take our place in the priorities, I think.
Graham's absolutely right, Chris. The fact of the matter is, when I first joined the NTDA, I spent, I don't know how many days, weeks down in London with Graham in Westminster, and you know, we have already a whole raft of regulations that need to be updated for our industry, which always sort of almost get there and then get sort of delayed by, well, let's face it, we've had general elections, we've had the Scottish referendum, we've had the Brexit referendum, we've had the Brexit negotiations, we've had trade tariffs imposed, we've had battles about trade tariffs that have been imposed. All of those things are going on. And the legal advice available to the government, the people who actually sort of look at that finer detail and dig down into every policy document that comes out, those are limited. You know, it's a limited service. And I remember we got so close to the National Measurement Office being given regulatory enforcement powers. Do you remember this, Graham? And suddenly we were told, oh, actually, all bets are off, even though we'd been told it was imminent, because the Scottish referendum's thrown up all sorts of legal things that we need to sort out. And that was it. You know, it got parked again. And this has happened time and time again. So Graham's absolutely right. You know, we can sit here very intelligently, very strategically, mapping out how things should look for our industry. But our industry is in a long chain of other industries, and the government at the moment is looking at everything from a nation perspective, and often a four-nation perspective. So it's difficult. It's very difficult.
One final question from my side. Graham, you mentioned something about the prospect of a what is effectively a wear rating on tyres in future. Is there any more detail you can add to that at this stage?
Only scanty, quite honestly, Chris. My understanding, I mean, the origin of this comes out of the EU plastic a couple of years ago. The industry is working on the challenge of producing a reproducible, reliable, consistent test protocol that could be applied worldwide. It's easy enough for regulators to threaten to regulate. If the industry can't adopt something rapidly, then we'll regulate for them. We'll decide what to do. I'll get our map out and draw a circuit of autoroutes around Germany, and you can just drive your vehicles around there. Completely naive misunderstanding of all the parameters that can possibly influence a test like that. But there is a test like that. It's in Texas, and it's existed for years and years. Frankly, widely disrespected because it suffers from all those issues to do with climatic variation, traffic variation. Oh, they've just resurfaced 20 miles of that 400-mile circuit. What's that done to the results? You can just, when you start to think for a moment, then you realize it's not a simple challenge. And we need at the scale of the testing requirements. There's manufacturers who are supporting between 5,000 and 10,000 stock keeping units in their catalogue. If you've got to test a representative sample, at least, of all those tyres, times the number of manufacturers that there are, you've got a colossal testing program. There's no point in imagining you're going to do it on one circuit. We will build a circuit somewhere in the world and everybody's tyres will be tested there. You're going to need tens or hundreds of circuits in order to have the capacity. But then every circuit's in a different place. There may be a different tarmac and the weather's different. So we rediscover all the, shall we say, all the miseries that we had early on with the tyre labelling regulation, where you end up with test results, every test conducted diligently, responsibly by competent people, but under circumstances that outside their control are different. And of course, you then end up with a scatter of results and they're not comparable. So one of the big challenges that we face with this abrasion resistance test is to make it reliable and reproducible. Out of all that, it seems because of the necessities to move fairly quickly, there's going to be a first stage, which is going to be a track-based test of some sort. So you're going to have a convoy of vehicles and you're going to equip them with a variety of tyres and you're going to drive them around over 400 miles of whatever it is. And then you're going to, whatever they do, I'm not party to the process, but do you weigh the tyres before and weigh them afterwards? Calculate the material loss? There'll be a way of doing it. And then they'll have to have some way of trying to correct and compensate for the fluctuation in weather conditions, that this test was done in Spain and that test was done in Norway and so on and so forth. Ultimately, the industry is working on a machine test. So you'd have a laboratory machine, and this is long term because the machine needs inventing. That you could do it in a laboratory with a controlled atmosphere and environment and so on and so forth. And then you could crank out these machines across the world and everyone can do the same test and will have much more comparable results. But that's 5 or 6 years away at least. The convoy test is perhaps something that we could roll out in a couple of years, plus the time it will then take to go through the standardization process with ISO and so on and so forth. So we're in those sorts of timescales. But it's going to be fraught. Got to say, it'll be fraught, and magazines will take great delight in reproducing sort of a test that's not quite the same as the regulatory test, and then showing that the ranking of these tyres is completely different from the one that's been published according to the standard test results. And I can already write your magazine article for you, Chris, because this is the route we're taking. But needs must, and it's all about being pragmatic, really.
Yeah, I think in support of that, Graham, I'd also say that if we look at the tyre manufacturers, those have always been ahead of the game. There are those that have, they've learned their lessons. But I'm very privileged. I see all the entries for the Tyre Manufacturer of the Year award and the product categories, and I see the environmental award, the wheelwrights run, and the amount of expertise that is going in to tyre construction now. to ensure that the environmental elements are addressed as well. And this is the entire manufacturing chain. This is not just the end product. This is the whole process in terms of where rubber is being sourced from, and the innovative ways they're looking at that, and how the tires are constructed to last longer and give off less particles. I mean, it's phenomenal. Such incredible work is being done at scientific level and engineering level that you've got to applaud the tire manufacturers. Really, they have grasped this bull by the horns, and they haven't sat back waiting, as Graham said, to be told what to do. They're ahead of the game on this now, and I think that whatever happens, ultimately, it'll be done in such a way that the tire manufacturers can hold their heads up and say, we were part of the success of this, as opposed to part of the failure.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your insight and detailed answers. That was a complex and penetrating conversation across a number of different issues. Some we planned and some we'd not planned. So thank you, Graham Wilson, Chief Executive of the BTMA, the British Tyre Manufacturers Association, and Stephen Hay, Chief Executive of NTDA, the National Tyre Distributors Association. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Finding the right tyres for the right conditions is important. WhatTyre.com will help you find the right tyres for your car, whatever that may be. So if your tyres are underperforming or in need of replacing, get free, impartial and independent advice with WhatTyre.com. WhatTyre.com. Find the best tyres for you.